so far, from one talk to another to another. The last part of the symposium of actionable sustainability, technology, policy in the city. For the last part, we had a panel, and you guys already know about it, but I'm really, really excited to sort of start this discussion, or rather continue this discussion on this meeting dance, or lack thereof, between technology and policy. And I spoke to a lot of you, all of you, either individually or in groups, and forgive me if I'm paraphrasing from things you said, but it just means that it was really, it kind of hit home. But this idea of always playing policy, playing catch up with technology, and I think Brian was the one who spoke about it, is perpetual. And so through the conversation today, we hope to really sort of, challenge the assumptions that are there about sort of technology being monolithic and out there, and sort of policy being about the people, and somehow we have to do this dance to catch up. But really think of those ideas in unison so that we can really affect the city. And that's where sort of Nigel's piece comes in, solving real problems for real people. So if technology is going to be real, and we're going to use it, and we're going to use it to solve real problems, then the policy pieces need to catch up. So for that kind of discussion, and so that we can take the conversation forward, we have a great, great panel here. I'm super excited, super inspired, and I really, Catherine's not here, but Catherine was instrumental in sort of introducing me to many of the fine people here. So we have Brad Swing. I do have to look at some of the bios because they're incredibly accomplished. So we have Brad Swing, who is the who's the director of the energy. Yes, energy. I do know that he has a background in policy from the Kennedy School as well, and he serves as the director of energy policy and programs for the city of Boston. And we were lucky enough to go and look at one of the climate ready presentations, and they talked about Renew, and then I read that you were sort of championing that effort as well. And when you start to speak, you can fill in more of the gaps, because I don't want to take up too much time here. So, and of course we have Brian. I first met Brian, I think 2 years ago, when he completely ripped us apart. For those of you who are taking symposium over here, we invited Brian, and at that time, Brian was working for the city in a similar role. And he completely ripped us apart. And he said that whatever you've done for the semester in climate change, he did too. And that's okay.
He's achieved rockstar status. He only goes by one name, Brian.
And strangely enough, despite having spent so many hours with the students and thinking that they've done fantastic work, what he said made sense to both our students and to me. And not that it was all bad, we could fight about it, but certainly it was inspirational. And since then, we followed Brian's career, and right now he is at Arup, which is one of the world-famous design engineering firms who work on just these kinds of issues and actual implementation in the private sector. So Brian Sweat is the Director of Cities and Sustainable Real Estate at Arup. They are headquartered in London. Right? Yes. And he's a nationally recognized leader in climate change. I'm sorry, it's not that I'm nervous, it's just I'm so excited. Leader in climate change and sustainability strategy with over a decade of leadership. Experience in the municipal government, private sector, real estate development, federal government, as well as nonprofit sectors. Sitting right in the middle is Erica Matheson, who was introduced to us by Anne Haynes, who teaches with us and is also on our advisory board. And from the first time I met Erica, I could see that her sort of spirit for environmental advocacy and making people aware of how to get policy decisions made and getting communities really resilient was sort of her passion and drive. And in her professional role, Erica is a lawyer, and she's the legislative director of the Environmental League of Massachusetts. So we'll hear a little more. And last but not the least, believe it or not, Josh is a faculty member in our program, as well as a senior policy analyst at the Department of Transportation. And though he and I have been colleagues for I don't know, over 7 years. It was the first time I'm seeing him in person. That's true, but I am delighted that he's here, and I'm delighted that this conversation was, exciting enough that he decided to join us for the whole day, and we're really looking forward to sort of hearing from him as well. So, just a formal introduction, Dr. Joshua Hassel. He is the Technology Policy Analyst of the U.S. Department of Transportation, as well as teaches a really, really great course over here in transportation planning. And next year, we are hoping that he's going to actually teach a course on driverless cars and such. And such, yes. So without further ado, the format today is going to be, we're going to get about 5 to 7, give about 5 to 7 minutes to each person on the panel, and they're kind of going to introduce their perspective and where they come from and the ideas they have on this issue. And then we have a set of questions, and we have to this. Thank you. So Brian, I think that's So the order is Brian, Brad, I think Josh after that, and Erica.
Thank you for the intro. I say yes whenever you it's supposed to be somewhere. It's part of being a fellow, so that's what you do. But I enjoy getting out of office and talking with folks about real big picture issues. So as Madhu mentioned, I'm Brian Sweat. I'm the Director of Cities and Sustainable Real Estate for Arup out of London. We solve real problems for real people, especially in the digital space. And one of our expertise is around the nexus of technology, policy, and urban affairs. And so I'm just going to briefly give a little bit of my background and tee up some of the questions, and then sort of a little bit of Eric's lens on this. We were highly restricted to about 4 slides. I tried to just have these be thoughtful.
You are.
So the lens I bring to my current work, I've actually never been on, before my current gig, I was never on the consulting side of the table. I've always been a client. So I was a real estate developer, I was a federal environmental official, and I was the chief of energy, environment, and open space for the city of Boston for Mayor Menino and Mayor Walsh. And so from that perspective, I'm an odd person to be at an engineering and consulting firm because I have no stamps on intent. I'm an integrator. I try to see the big picture. I try to bring whatever the 56 plus or minus services that Arup has in the right multidisciplinary approach to solve urban problems at scale. And most of the issues I work with in the projects of any scale include significant emphasis of policy, technology, and urban development, including here in Massachusetts. So from that lens, we are not, to be very clear, Arup doesn't make widgets. We don't make platforms. We don't sell equipment because we don't believe that that's the right approach to dive in and solve these issues. We need to understand what the challenges are from the people perspective, understand what the drivers are, and figure out what the right solution is. And ideally, you want it to be the least complicated solution to solve the problem, because that likely will have the longest game and be most cost-effective, most efficient, and most socially equitable in terms of being able to roll out. The challenge is technology is grossly outpacing the pace at which policy and urban development can catch up with it. So this is a picture from the Papal inauguration 2005. This is Pope Benedict, and pay attention to the bottom right. This is 2013. 8 years. You had, 8 years you had a ubiquitous adoption of technology in a place that is not necessarily known to be, at the forefront of smart technology. Right. So no wonder we can't catch up in the policy world about trying to get in front of this to say what are the implications, both challenging and opportunities to be able to take advantage of this. So technology changes cities, but technology is constantly changing. Those dynamics are moving together in conflict and in synergy all the time. And by the time you think you've come up with the right policy, the right framework, the technology jumps forward, and it's moving in an entirely different direction that you couldn't anticipate. So we have been trying to get in front of this for a long time. We've specifically written about the digital and smart cities since 2010 at a large scale, and the implications of what this means. And all these are publicly available on our website, arup.com/publications. At the scale of how do cities make sense of this? How do they make sense of the technology, the data? We're big believers in figure out the questions you want to ask first, and then figure out the data you need to answer them. Don't create this giant data collection warehouse, and then figure out what you want to do. Terrible expenditure. Apparently, it wouldn't pass muster in Columbia, which is good. We do a lot of work in Bogota. We have a big office in Bogota. But thinking at the city scale of the implications of technology and some for particular uses. So the second one from the right on the bottom is a piece of work we did for Mayor Paez from Rio de Janeiro. I think we made up the word. It's called Policy Digitocracy. And the study was the role of technology in citizen engagement in solving climate change. And this was when Mayor Paez was the chair of C40, which was the climate leadership group of cities around the world, which Boston is now a member of. And he specifically noticed that there was this disconnect between technology and citizen engagement in the climate change arena that could unlock a whole lot of motivational behaviors at the people scale. And this wasn't, let's create this giant central database and warehouse. It was, how do we engage? So citizen engagement was intentionally part of that trifecta. And that was a really interesting piece of work that, to your point, thinking about the applications in the developing world, I tend to agree with Nigel that we've oftentimes found it a lot easier to work in developing world in many cities because there are less barriers, there's less regulation, there's less legislation that prevents you from doing things. Politics is easier to solve. And so actually Mayor Paez in Rio has been phenomenal at this. Curataba, also in Brazil around transportation and smart transportation have been fantastic at this. So thinking in those lenses, we've been spending a lot of time trying to pull those lessons learned. We're a firm of 15,000 globally, 90 offices around the world, and applying that in different places. We are seeing this is my last slide, across the spectrum of sustainability policy technology interface. So we're seeing it, so cities is intentionally sort of that nexus that pulls everything together, but usually we enter the conversation from a particular service offering or system, from transportation, from utility, especially energy, from the commercial business, starting at a building, broadening out your portfolio, then talking about the full spectrum of a place. Major events are catalysts for these issues. We were intimately involved in London 2012 and set up sort of the digital infrastructure and the fiber backbone that then became the redevelopment of the city, as well as how we build. So talking about command and control, BIM versus GIS in terms of how we build and then use our sites and maintain them. But it usually gets back to the city's conversation. And we are working at scale in Massachusetts on some pretty exciting ones. One I can share, hired a great firm to think about smart utility infrastructure. They know by necessity that was never built for the scale of development, residential, commercial that they want. And so they are motivated to think differently. They're not an MWA community. The power and the water and the gas are not to the scale that you could ever have the development that they're envisioning. And they are long-term owners and thinking very proactively about this, and frankly, are stunningly public about their desire to be a smart city without yet having really defined what it means for them. And so we've come on board and trying to help them navigate that full spectrum, including everything from autonomous vehicles to thinking about digital control and reporting, to thinking about how they connect all their systems to find those multivariate opportunities for efficiency. So I think, from my perspective, that nexus of sustainability policy and technology is really where it's at these days, but it should not be technology driven. It should be policy driven, sustainability driven, and people driven. And technology is the means to the end. And far too often, you're going to see a service or an offering that's out there that is a solution looking for a problem, as opposed to saying, let's understand the dynamics of this place and understand what is necessary to accomplish the particular goals of this place at that nexus. Usually we're more successful if we start from that point. So with that, I will turn it over. I'm not sure who's next.
Brad.
Well, while we're getting the slide up, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be with Brian again, and Erica, I know very well, nice to meet you. And to say, Nigel, when you were talking about Mayor Menino, I was remembering a moment that I had. I've worked for the city for 22 years, and so I overlapped a lot with Mayor Menino and pretty much his entire term as mayor. And we were doing, I had him out for like a third in a row green building event where we were talking about the integration of architecture and engineering and how do you deal with the upfront soft costs of looking at a building design early in the process so that we would make green decisions. And he pulled me aside and he said, my people don't really understand what you're talking about. This woman who came out to this event today, she's lived on my street, Chesterfield Street, next to me for 20 years. And if you don't improve the life of this woman today, I don't want you to come to work tomorrow. And in all honesty, that has really stayed with me because you know, I work on, you know, sustainability and climate change issues for the city of Boston, and if I ever forget that we really are about plowing the streets, picking up the trash, educating the kids, dealing with public health emergencies, putting out the fires, our boss doesn't get reelected and we don't have a job, and, you know, but at the same time, municipal government is uniquely situated to appreciate how the nexus of these, you know, technology solutions, these, you know, worldwide concerns about sustainability and greenhouse gas emissions and how do we adapt for rising seas, if we don't figure out how to make those solutions relevant and done in a way that improves the lives of the mayor's neighbor, then we really aren't making progress. So let's see. Ostensibly, I'm talking about microgrids and district energy today. I'd almost wish that the framing of the discussion were public-private partnerships, just because the discussion came up before we started on how do we deal with this in the Trump era. And so I really want to make the point very quickly that you're hearing public-private partnerships thrown around in the discussion of the infrastructure bill in DC. And if I'm going to build a district energy microgrid in the Marine Park, which we are on our way to doing, and I'll get into the specifics of that, we're going to need a public-private partnership. But what I say to Mayor Walsh now is that I'm hoping that we can queue up our need for a public-private partnership in a way for this mayor to assert that those are good and necessary words that can be accomplished with an ideology of, you know, that reflects our values, the political party of the mayor as opposed to the political party of the current president, where you hear rightly that his public-private partnership idea is very much a giveaway to the very wealthy to privatize the public realm in a way that would has potentially permanent damage. And we want to do a public-private partnership to build a district energy microgrid in the Marine Park, and we want to do it in a responsible way where we need a private entity to design, build, operate, and then the key element that makes it different from what you hear about in DC is that there's a moment where there's a required negotiation for the possible transfer back to the public sphere of that asset. And without that, you get what you're hearing about from DC. And with it, you can have necessary and responsible public-private partnerships. District energy microgrids, I only have a minute. Why do we care about these things? We remember Sandy, and I hope you've seen the photographs of Manhattan. I only had 3 slides, so one of them would have been, the fourth one would have been Manhattan with the lights off below 57th Street, but Battery Park City stayed on because it had an islandable microgrid. And, you know, if we're going to talk about the role of technology in people, we're talking about life-saving, necessary opportunities for there to be electricity and heat and cooling that stays in localized energy systems. You know, the current paradigm that's ruled since Thomas Edison in the 1880s is you have a generation plant way, way far away. You have transmission lines where you lose 30% of your electricity. Then you have a substation and you have distribution lines, and then you flick the switch. If we're going to have a future that deals with the reality of climate change that's far more energy efficient and we hope will lower the total cost of energy to end users and really provide a cost of living for urban residents in Boston who are struggling with that, is that we can have localized power generation through combined heat and power that has a localized electricity distribution system that can be islanded from the grid. And if you have the full shebang, you have localized districts of thermal piping for thermal energy for your heating and cooling needs, and you can have these self-contained units. So we're trying to build one of these in the Ray Flynn Marine Park. I'll say quickly that the approach we've taken is something of a 3-dimensional chessboard. We wanted a real project on the ground. We've had policy development issues in the middle where we're dealing with an issue I'll get into hopefully briefly. And then on the top, the community energy study that figures out how we can do this citywide. So we're trying to do what I just basically described in a real place, the Ray Flynn Marine Park in the South Boston waterfront. The policy challenge is that if we're gonna have these resilience and benefits, lower total cost of energy, reduced greenhouse gas emissions in anywhere other than where they currently exist, they're quite prevalent on single owner campuses, military bases, places where there are like a single meter, single owner. And, you know, the places where we need this aren't served by single owners. And so we really need to solve a problem if we're gonna have these benefits locate anywhere other than single owner campuses. And so we've been working for years on the policy barriers to multi-owner microgrids. I'll just say we've had really successful stakeholder engagement workshops. We've come up with a business plan. We've come up with an understanding of the contractual agreements that we would need to actually deploy one of these things. And so I think we're ready to go. We need to understand better where all of these things can happen within the city. So the top level of our three-dimensional chessboard was this community energy study. What we did there was really leverage the horsepower of the MIT Sustainable Design Labs that have done energy modeling around for cities around the world. And they developed for us what we believe is the most granular energy demand map of any city in the world, 115,000 buildings, and we came up with 12, I'll just say very quickly, we would have loved to have done this with actual pulse meter data from every structure in the building, every structure in the city, but customer level energy use data is a big privacy issue. And so we just decided to go around it and model the energy data. We had 12 different building types to which we ascribed general sort of energy use profiles. We had 4 different eras in which those buildings were built, so we had 48 different types of modeled energy use that we connected to 115,000 buildings. And that allowed us to have this incredible 24/7, hour of the day energy model for the entire city of Boston. And then on top of that, there was this algorithmic tool developed by the Lawrence Berkeley National Labs called Distributed Energy Resources Customer Adoption Model, known as DERCAM. And DERCAM just sort of took its, Nigel, thank you for saying you're not a numbers guy. I'm allergic to numbers. So, how this happened, I'll never understand. But this algorithm just kind of swept through our energy model and looked for configurations of buildings where a suite of district energy microgrid technologies would be suitable based on the existing configuration of buildings in very specific hyper-local areas of the city. And we, to address, that technology needs to solve the problems of real people. We have this multi-owner, multi-user microgrids problem that we need to solve for commercial areas, for areas. But we also asked the algorithmic tool to look at concentrations of areas of affordable housing where a local district energy microgrid might actually help with the cost of living. And we asked the algorithm to look for areas where there are concentrations of what we sort of emergency preparedness clusters of like convenience stores, gas stations, community centers, where a district energy microgrid could serve very specific needs of emergencies. I did want to say that related to what Brian was talking about in terms of smart utilities down in Weymouth, we have a really exciting process where we're trying to take this effort to integrate energy system planning with the planning functions of Boston City government, which is kind of the sort of internal punchline of what I've been trying to do for many years. We're now trying to integrate energy, fiber, water, smart transport, utility planning for a specific build-out area of the city, the Dorchester Avenue corridor between Broadway and Andrew Red Line stations, the planned .ave area. So we have a real one of those companies come in, and then they would come in as groups, and that was even worse. and they were like, we want to help you build a smart city. And I was like, then help us build a smart city. And the way we mean that is we want to build a smart city ready district. Like you have solar ready design, you can build a building, you don't have the money to put on PV right now, at least you have a solar ready design. We want to build a smart city ready district. And the place where that's going to happen is in the street, the subsurface infrastructure and the fact that energy, fiber, water, smart transport utilities are going to need to have some kind of subsurface pipe. How do we design this? So we hired, a big philanthropic grant. We were able to hire AECOM and a good consultancy team, and they're actually coming up with not exactly designs, but prototypes of exactly how the subsurface infrastructure could look to have energy, fiber, water, smart transport built out in this real district. We're looking for other districts and where we could actually try this out as well. So very exciting time. For those of you who are in school and thinking about a career, I really commend municipal government to your serious consideration. I've really had a blast for the 22 years that I've been doing it, and I look forward to discussing these questions more.
And municipal government is where the things actually happen,
Yeah.
as opposed to my realm, which is policy. So I promised my day employer, the USDOT, that I would say that you them about to explain. Mine is professor, not the government's all of that drill. I want to talk about sort of a policy framework. Transportation accounts, as many of you know, for about 1/3 of total greenhouse gas emissions. It's the fastest growing sector in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, both because of growing, we're driving more miles every year. There's more freight every year. When we order from Amazon and the brown truck pulls up to our door, there's more of that going on. And other sectors like industry and power generation have gone over to natural gas, and they can more directly access renewables. Transportation can, but only indirectly through electrification. So transportation is an important target for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And apologies to former students who are in the room, they've heard some of this. But I found this framework very, very appealing. There's really only three levers, three groups of actions that are applicable to climate and to greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector. The first has to do with the carbon content of the fuel, what we're using. And so I have hydrogen. I also have an electric vehicle because, of course, the energy from electric vehicles has to come somewhere. And depending on the grid mix that's powering your electric vehicle, it could be, in theory, all from solar energy. It could also be, in theory, all from coal. So there's a great difference. There's a great spectrum of impacts. So the carbon content of the fuel. Now, there's no such thing as a free lunch in nature and in physics. And one of the things to remember about lower carbon fuel, or in the case of hydrogen, zero carbon fuel, is that it also has a lower energy density. When you're talking about hydrocarbons, at least, when you reduce the carbon, you reduce the energy potential. So it doesn't mean it's bad, it just means that there's no such thing as a free lunch, and you will be burning more of that fuel per mile traveled than you will. I mean, gasoline is an incredible technology. This is not really necessarily a conspiracy theory that we all drive around in gas-powered cars. It's a remarkable technology with a lot of bad, social impacts. The second category in this framework is fuel efficiency. How efficiently we're using a unit of energy to get a unit of work done. And I have here a modern plug-in Prius, and this is the new Tesla soon to be released Model 3 full electric car. So there are lots of different policies that can impact the fuel efficiency of our transport sector. Those range from the fuel efficiency standards that the federal government has been instrumental in promulgating for several decades. Those also could include, in my perfect world, carbon pricing for fuel to further encourage the development through the market of more efficient machines, more efficient ways of getting more work done for every unit of fuel we're producing, or transitioning over to, in theory at least, vehicles that can use fully carbon-free energy. And the third one, and this is what really often gets the most attention in planning circles, is what I call transportation, reducing the amount of fossil fuel to travel. That could be vehicle miles traveled, it could be ton miles for freight, although freight, just as a brief aside, freight's a more difficult challenge because, at least today, we're not really at the point, even though we have passenger vehicles that can go 2 or close to 300 miles on a charge, we're not there for freight yet in terms of over the road, the truck that's driving from LA to Boston with a load of lettuce kind of thing. We're still using diesel fuel. Now, we are seeing electrification in short distance drayage freight from the Port of Los Angeles or the Port of Long Beach to, a break bulk facility. They're electrifying that. But these are the kind of things we often hear about, reshaping cities, reinvesting in our transportation systems to allow different kinds of travel, to allow travel that's less dependent on petroleum-powered or fossil fuel-powered vehicles. And those can range from policies to encourage and facilitate biking to, in the lower left there, sort of better mixed use, complete street design where pedestrians and cars can mingle, but it's safer pedestrians. And of course, transit. And the magic of transit is that you can put a lot of people in one vehicle. A bus gets about 4 miles to the gallon, which is terribly inefficient out of per vehicle mile. But if you have 45 people in the bus, you do the division, and the carbon per passenger is very low. So I think I'll stop there. I find this framework very helpful, whether you're thinking about public policy or the kinds of things that private industry can do, or the things that public-private partnerships can accomplish. There's really only 3 groups of actions you can take, and that's good because it gives us a framework to think about these.
I won the award for the fewest slides. My name is Erica Madison. I will not be using slides. I'm the legislative director at a nonprofit organization called the Environmental League of Massachusetts. We do statewide policy advocacy on protecting our land, air, and water. I want to talk with you about how to have impact, because I think most of you, if not all of you, want to have impact on things that you care about. I grew up a couple minutes from here in Brookline, and I grew up believing that I had the power to have impact. And why is that? I learned from my parents' example, who've been working on open space issues in Brookline and Boston with the Emerald Necklace, which is the chain of parks that goes through Brookline and Boston. Been working on open space issues for about 40 years, and I've been able to literally out my window growing up see the transformation that took place thanks to them and people they worked with and organizations they worked with and the advocacy that they did to really change what was basically a community liability, which was a park that was not well cared for and had not had appropriate investments made in it. Really transform into a community asset, something that has increased property value, something that has increased quality of life for people, something that has gone from being a divider, which is what I don't believe parks should be, into a bridge, which is what I do believe parks should be. So to help people get from point A to point B, whether they're biking or walking, not something that's actually making it harder to get from point A to point B. And so the amount of investments they were able to leverage on the federal, state, and local levels for this piece of open space, working with partners over the years, just very influential for me as a child. So fast forward, I was involved in many environmental initiatives from my youth on up through today. And what I want to kind of leave you with is that you can have impact. And that one of the most, kind of the ways that I recommend having impact is focusing on your local community. Because obviously climate change and all kinds of issues are international issues that know no man-made boundaries, but there are a lot of things right here that need our attention, right? So whether it's you care about transportation issues, open space issues, clean water, climate change, air quality, food production, whatever it is you care about, there's stuff right here that needs you. Or wherever you live, there are issues that need you. So I'm going to do a quiz, which is I want you to think about if you have a kind of what you consider to be your permanent residence. We'll consider these questions for that, since I'm sure we have students from all over the place who don't think of this as their permanent residence. So thinking of your permanent residence, I want you to raise your hand if you know who all of your elected officials are. On the municipal level, on the state level, on the national level, okay, or if you live, in this area, do you know who all those people are? Okay, so I'm not seeing a lot of hands going up, which proves my theory, which is that a lot of us in the world do not know the people who represent us. Now I want you to think about where you live, if you're living here, kind of, more short term, if you're a student at BU, maybe you're here for a few years or a semester, I want you to think about this place, and I want you to raise your hand if you know the people who represent you where you are living right now on the local, state, and federal, and I'm not seeing any hands, right? So this really proves my point, which is that my work as a lobbyist, as an environmental protection lobbyist, is very focused on relationships. And there's a reason for that. I can't go up to a legislator and start talking with them about a bill or an issue if they've never met me before and there's no trust and they don't know anything about me or my organization. Why are they really gonna listen to me? Why are they gonna care what I have to say? Why are they gonna trust that what I'm saying is legitimate or, So it's the exact same if you're not a lobbyist. If you're a person who just cares about stuff and you wanna have an impact, how are you possibly going to influence people if you don't know who they are, and if they don't know who you are? So the very first thing you have to do, obviously, is know who represents you. Even if you're only gonna be here for a few years, I urge you to go on wheredoivotema.com, type in your address, and find out who represents you. Because somebody can't possibly represent you if they don't know that you're their constituents. If they don't know that you live in their district, they can't represent your interests. They can't go work on legislation that's important to you because they don't know you. And so not only do you need to know who represents you, you need to then start to build a relationship with them, because it's not just enough for you to know that they exist and that they are your elected officials. They need to know that you exist, right? And they need to know what's important to you. So step 2 in my kind of activism or advocacy guidebook here is for you to start to form a relationship with the people who elect you, who represent you. And it's very easy to start to do this. You can follow them on social media. You can sign up for their e-newsletters. A lot of them have these. You can go to their coffee hours when they do like office hours in their district. Maybe it's at a library or a community center, senior center, or coffee shop. You can go and you can introduce yourself and you can tell them what you're involved in, what you're interested in. You can find out what they're working on, and you can start to build that relationship. And so those are a couple just very basic things that I urge everybody to do if it's important to you to have an impact. And then you start to work with them on the issues that are important to you, and you can, go from there. But we really need to have that foundation before you even go beyond that and start really trying to lobby them on things you care about. And then how I want to kind of relate that to what the theme of today's symposium is about is that I believe that activism is crucial for us to achieve in the near future the kinds of things that we've been talking about here today. So when we think about where our energy comes from right now, our water, when we think about our transportation systems, when we think about our food production, any of these kinds of things, the old model has been that these were very centralized resources, right? Large corporations are controlling these resources upon which we are dependent, and we are subject to the whims of the market, of shareholders, of the decisions that the CEOs make, of all these different things. They're totally not, within most of our kind of everyday power. And so we are very susceptible to all kinds of different forces. We are not really being very self-determining or self-sufficient. And if you compare that to a model of democratization of these resources, of decentralization, of localization, the kinds of things that we've been hearing about today, it's just a very different kind of worldview and a different paradigm. But if we as activists, as active citizens, feel that it is in our interest to be able to get more of our food from 20 miles away as opposed to 2,000 miles away, if we think that it's better for us to be able to, kind of get around using some of the modes of transportation that Josh was talking about, and instead of having to sit in traffic for an hour on a highway in the morning and at night to get where we're going, and so forth and so on. If we think that our energy production would be better for us if it were more local and we had more control over it, and it's tapping into renewable resources like the sun and wind, then we need to be stepping up. And I've seen the impact that this can have. My organization, the Environmental League, was instrumental last session on Beacon Hill, influencing what ended up being in some pretty major energy legislation. And had we not been working collaboratively with other organizations and people who care about having a clean energy future and moving away from fossil fuels, I can say that the legislation would look pretty different, and that would have pretty major consequences for Massachusetts. Because of the work that we did, that we helped to usher in, we are going to have more offshore wind in Massachusetts. We are fighting against the push of moneyed interest to have more fossil fuel infrastructure in Massachusetts, to expand gas pipelines. Because we believe that energy efficiency and conservation and renewable energy are the kind of clean energy future that we need to be creating for having healthy and sustainable communities. So basically my point is that activism can help us get to this localization, democratization, and decentralization faster. Because the big corporations want to hold on to the power, and they don't want that to happen. But if we organize and we advocate and we build those relationships with our elected officials, and we can make a compelling case, we can push back against the big corporations and the forces that are trying to maintain the status quo and prevent us from creating a sustainable, healthy future.
So we're scheduled to end about now, but I think that, there's a reason I made the tea and network in an hour after, because I suspected that there would be some good conversation. And it's really fantastic to hear from all four of the panel and sort of get a sense of where they're coming from. And I think in a way we have covered some of the larger questions and the in-betweens, but I think this might be a question which I would open up the time, but then I would encourage that everybody sort of jump in. And the question is that how can we as we already know that there's this problem with the technology and so on. So how do we as a society better sort of align ourselves with the technologies via the policy vehicles? And frankly, I think there's a finer sort of analysis or question we can get at. Do we really need to be at the forefront of that technology, or does policy follow the pace of the city and sort of what's available? So if not, there could be cases where it could be cases where not, but I'd just love to know what you have to say about that.
It's a good question. In my opinion, so policy should protect against people being detrimentally impacted by unintended consequences of testing technology. Beyond that, policy should get out of the way, right? Because we want to spur innovation. You're going to spend the resources and time fighting something that will eventually happen anyway. And anytime we try to stop technology, usually we lose and we don't get those resources and time back. Instead of figuring out how do you protect against the unintended consequences, make sure everybody is participating at their level. I am not an early adopter. But I understand the policies that allow early adopters to be there, right? And I'm the last, I like to have the second model of the phone and the second model of the car. But other folks want to be at the leading edge, and that's totally fine. We need to, and we're at that forefront now, figuring out Massachusetts autonomous vehicle and pilot. Do we want to have folks identify themselves as willing to participate in an autonomous vehicle shuttle pilot, or do we want to just open it up to the public and have signers saying, if you get on, you're signing on to that? There are really interesting conversations about how we promote that. But I do think Massachusetts in particular has been at the forefront of energy technology, clean tech, to the point where we now have more clean tech jobs in Massachusetts than there are coal mining jobs in the entire country. And yet all you hear about nationally is coal mining jobs. There are between 60 and 70,000 coal mining jobs in the U.S. There are over 100,000 clean tech jobs in Massachusetts today. So there's this disconnect where, and that's why you don't hear anybody fighting for that. We don't have coal, but like that dynamic is different. And so I think there are examples of this in smart economic policy. We need to deal with the transition. So there are winners and losers and the users of technology and the providers of them. But we need to understand that we should focus our efforts in dealing with that transition, not in stopping the adoption of technology, because we're very likely to fail.
I think that's a very, very cogent way to say it. Public policy, in my opinion, can play an important role in setting performance standards. Here's what we, regardless of how the technology comes out or whatever you want to do, who's going to adopt first, here are the minimum safety standards, here are the minimum social equity standards. Public policy can also perhaps help in seeding research to do some proving that's focused on the longer term social impacts that maybe individual companies aren't, and frankly, maybe shouldn't even be expected to be paying attention, but I completely agree that beyond that, get out of the way, and I think above all, the public sector probably should, the public sector does not have a good track record where they pick winners. We're gonna invest in an innovation center that's gonna do 3D printing in Iowa. Why, right? So set social goals and then let the market do what it does. That's, I would agree with that.
But I would add, there's been phenomenal success in creating spaces for incubation,
Right,
right? So providing the toolboxes. So I just came back from Los Angeles.
right, the
The
opportunity.
next time you guys get out of Los Angeles, go visit the LA Clean Tech Incubator. They have 40 startups by different levels of membership having access to data centers, wet labs, trial spaces for robotics, because at a certain scale, that it only makes sense at a certain economy of scale, right? And so the ability to sort of sign a membership and get a couple of hours access into a wet lab, as opposed to having to fund one yourself and raise VC, is phenomenally beneficial. And I think the right role, you're not picking a winner and loser, you're saying,
Right.
I want to pick innovation,
Right.
I want to fund that, and then we'll see where it goes.
And the next time you're in Somerville, go to Greentown Labs, because that's the local
Oh, yeah.
version of
That's
that
right.
and cheaper to get to than California. So
And
and it's the largest, what is it, the largest clean tech incubator, I think, in the country. And they're actually, oh, not anymore, okay, but they're also,
That's
and
site visit
they're also,
for next year.
yeah, they're also
Go
expanding
to LA.
now, so there are
LA.
a lot of companies in there because they're also expanding.
That's great.
Brad, you,
Well, I just, my perspective from municipal government is that we're uniquely situated to use projects
Yeah.
to solve policy barriers. And I really believe strongly in learning by doing. And I get quite impatient with, similar impatience with the multinational smart city technology companies that want to sell us platforms. They're sort of analogous in my mind. And what my career has been about has been recognizing that if at municipal government, if you can convince local leadership, if you can convince the local community, if you can secure the resources and pull the building permit, you can get in the ground. And by doing that, you can really push all layers of society, local, state, federal, to sort out the policy barriers that would otherwise be in the way of the next time that project was done. We did that with the first green building in Boston. We were able to get in the ground, and we learned so much from the first instance of actually having an engineered stamped drawing be approved by our building department for a structure without a boiler or a furnace, because it was the first time that a geothermal heat pump was going to provide the energy of a building. And so you could have had policy discussions on how to solve that problem for years, and it would never have gotten anywhere. But because it was a real project that needed to get a certificate of occupancy for it to operate, to be built and everything else, we actually had to go through that very real world example of a very specific barrier. But then once in the ground, what we had learned by doing that, we were able to then extrapolate into a year-long policy discussion that engaged all the stakeholders involved in real estate finance, architects, engineers, and we used that to come up with the first in the nation private building, green building requirements. And so a project resulted in citywide policy. And that insight has really shaped my career. So I'm trying to do that with the district energy microgrid, because if we can actually get in the ground with actually building one, it will force all layers of society to sort through these barriers. That otherwise, if you were trying to solve them all before you broke ground, you would never get there. So that's
Boston Nature Center?
the Boston Nature Center. And
That's
we
a
were
great
able-
place for people to go visit.
Yeah, in
Boston
Mattapan,
Nature
in
Center.
Mattapan. And I'll just point out that we were not able to, as government, to procure a green design when we started that in 1999. We had to transfer that design and construction process to the nonprofit that operates in Mass Audubon, because at the time, the statutes did not allow for integrated design build. You had to have a separate procurement for design and a separate procurement for construction. It wasn't, the building was dedicated in 2002, and in 2003, the state legislature authorized design build procurement. And actually, right now, analogously, I'm trying to build a district energy microgrid, and I have to go to the legislature to get project-specific permission to procure any kind of public-private partnership.
Acquisitions.
Yeah, and, you know, and I actually can appreciate why the legislature wants to hold a level of sort of project-specific, like yay or nay, because these public-private partnerships, as I tried to allude to briefly, are very volatile in terms of their impact on society and democracy. But, you know, I believe very strongly in them. Unless we figure out how these technology solutions generate cash flow where we can have project finance, where the projects essentially pay for themselves, we simply cannot expect American society to capitalize the improvements to our cities to prepare for climate change. We have got to solve these problems. And
what you're saying makes, you know, absolute sense, and you almost answered the question that I was going to raise is, you know, of course there is a policy barrier, but through these demonstration projects, we've actually managed to take the first step, and then that sort of transforms into policy over time. So apart from sort of the demonstration project aspect, are there, you know, you also talk about sort of market forces, public-private partnerships and things like that. Are there some particular sort of ingredients to the mix which is going to make it happen as successfully as you have managed to do with these than others? So if we were looking at sort of creating policy or going to the next step with the new technology, then what would be, from a city government person's point of view, what would be those things that we need to have in order to be able to, you know, break through the initial policy barriers? Or in other words, you know, how do you manage to do all the wonderful things that you've done in such a short time? So, for example, the Dorchester corridor and so on.
Well, that one, it's an interesting story of being able to engage philanthropy, because in all honesty, you just really can't ask the mayor to, you know, with a squeezed capital and operating budget to carve out, you know, that's a $300,000 one-year process. And, but, you know, it also took the fact that we had several years of experience of having philanthropically funded energy system planning, which I work in the city side. This is a bit bureaucratic for a second, but this energy planner was purposely planted at the Boston Planning and Development Agency. I made a dangerous career out of planting people in bureaucracies I don't work in. But, you know, that was done on purpose because we wanted energy system planning to get integrated with the planning functions of city government. And so we were able, with you know, that kind of internal acceptance, to expand that into the energy, fiber, water, smart transport, integrated utility planning. And this was happening just as Mayor Walsh, who believes in planning, was doing the first citywide planning process in 50 years, and we were in very serious ways looking for growth districts. And so the notion of district energy and integrated utility planning for a smart city district fit with the idea of finding areas of the city like the Fenway corridor, or, you know, where there's obviously new cities rising from where there had been sort of industrial corridors. And so we were able to, and I think what was absolutely vital was that we had an actual area of the city that's going to be built out. So we're getting actual cost benefit analyses of our smart utility technologies based on the topography, based on the real world of where these are going to be built. So that, you know, but I just quickly would say the overall answer is I think we need to figure out how we're going to pay for these things. And, you know, I'm old enough to remember that it's been since 1981, and I'll say since the Reagan administration really just started to dismantle, this is personal opinion, dismantle the notion of the public sphere. You know, we just don't, you know, we now expect developers to build streets and build parks and stuff. And so, you know, that's just the world we work in. But we now have to realize that if we are going to build things that have
very necessary sort of public impact to address climate change, we're gonna have to figure out how to develop the public-private partnerships, the project finance, the cash flows that can be captured to at least help capitalize these improvements.
So I guess I would push back on that.
Of course you would.
But I mean,
Yes, Brian.
I mean, speaking as a recovering city hall official, the problem is government, right? I mean, the problem isn't that these economic models don't exist; they exist. And the problem is not accessing private sector capital; it's that the public sector can't figure out how to get it out of its own way to allow for the right types of partnerships and public-private partnerships to happen.
Hence
I
my
agree, so it's
question,
not
what
like,
do you do
I
differently?
think so my answer would be like
Yes,
courageous politicians who
Yes,
leave the special
champions of
interests
the
at the
system,
door when they start
absolutely.
talking about how you sponsor innovation. And I think the underlying from Brett's comments, a lot of what Boston was able to do happened, one, because we've had a series of mayors and leadership that have allowed innovation to happen, but also, most important, we had a phenomenal philanthropic leader willing to put real money into this.
Very, very.
And so, you know, we have a, you know, frankly, I mean, we have $1 billion plus budget in the city of Boston. The fact that we can't carve out, well, let's take the schools out of it.
Oh,
So,
okay, yeah, all right.
So I'll leave schools because that's a disaster in and of itself.
Boy, you don't work for the mayor anymore, do you?
If you want to see what a structural budget deficit looks like, look at the school budget. But, you know, on the private sector, on the rest of the budget, to say we can't carve out money to give innovation and allow technology the space to fail, right? And I worked for, and this should be apolitical. My first job was working for Christy Todd Whitman down
There's
in
no
Washington.
such thing, but,
Well, I used to be, but I used to work for Christy Todd Whitman down in Washington, when she was administrating EPA. And I worked for the Office of Innovation, which they just took Gore's idea, which is reinvention, and re-labeled it. And that's all we have to do to keep offices going, budget funded, we just take the term that is bothering folks and rename it. And she said, we need to give our folks permission to fail when they're investing in technology and innovation, including especially in the public sector. That everything can't be a win, because if you need to be 99% certain that something's gonna work, you're never gonna be innovative.
Right.
You're always gonna use the last solution, be risk averse, and then we'll never make progress. And so I think there's an important dynamic there. The private sector is always innovative, because if you're not moving forward, you're dying. The public sector is the area where we need to change that and adopt some more private
it
sector.
depends on the city, I suppose.
But I would say there are almost 0 cities globally that are doing enough around, that are reaching their potential around sponsoring innovation and technology, solving sustainability issues. It is usually the children.
Singapore.
So that's one that I think you could argue is at the forefront, but again, they're given certainties. Which one?
Singapore. So that's great, that's great. You know, I just want to sort of shift the discussion a bit and take it to the specific example of driverless or automated vehicles, because that's sort of been in our psyche a lot, because, you know, we're trying to decide whether we need this thing, we love this thing, we want this thing, but we're fearful of this thing. So there's all these issues, and of course, sort of underlying issues of access to this kind of automated technology, as well as sort of the inequity issues. And I think, I don't know which conversation it was, that somebody talked about the first mile and the last mile problem, and of course that is also associated with this whole automation. So just to sort of open it up to the panel, but more specifically for Josh to.
You know, one of the challenges that we have right now is like, how do you make that argument that there are these sort of bridge, we have to live through these bridge moments. We despite what my very brilliant boss always suggests, we just can't snap our fingers and get everything out of the way. And
Well, on the natural gas point, I mean, it's important for those of us who don't know kind of about what the state's energy mix is. Already more than half of the state's energy is coming from natural gas. So it's not like we don't use any, we use a ton, we use a lot.
which is
of natural gas.
responsible for our grid mix being a
Well,
hell of a lot cleaner than it was.
And
15 years
it,
ago.
you know, it's a step in the right direction, but when you think about diversification and the steps, you know, which direction are we headed in for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, we can sink billions of dollars into more fossil fuel infrastructure, which would be gas pipelines, or we can say, hey, you know, we're probably being pretty wasteful with energy a whole lot of the time, whether you think about the residential sector, whether you think about transportation, whether you think about industry, whatever, you know, piece of the pie you think of our energy consumption, which is part of why the Environmental League, we're pushing for legislation that would require home energy audits at the point of sale, which is similar to, you know, we'd love to work more closely with the city to really push this. And the city did, you know, an excellent job as a leader passing the, what's called BERDA, the Building Energy Rating and Disclosure Ordinance a few years ago, which is basically just to get the large commercial buildings to report on their energy consumption, because what you measure, you manage, and if you're not even tracking, and I know this because I used to do this for Suffolk University, you know, when I started as their sustainability coordinator, nobody had any idea how much energy we were using, nobody was tracking it, nobody was even checking to make sure that like we were using what we were paying for, we were just millions of dollars going out the door, and nobody was trying to do anything to bring that consumption down. And then we started creating a sustainability program, we started doing energy conservation competitions in the residence halls. We started telling buildings what, you know, how much energy they were using and so forth and so on. We started doing retrofits, and we were able to save millions of dollars and bring our energy consumption down substantially. There are opportunities like that all over the place in Massachusetts that we're not capitalizing on, let alone if you go around for a day trip and you look at how many solar panels you see on roofs. I mean, there are tons of roofs that don't have solar that are good candidates for solar that don't have it yet. So before we think about more fossil fuels, I would say there's so much being left on the table right now that would create local jobs, that would contribute to cleaner air, that could be more equitable, that lies in conservation, efficiency, and renewable energy.
Completely agree. Completely agree.
So I,
So I let me add one framework, another one. So, of course.
actually, the question was going to be posed to you.
Well, if I don't answer it, you can fire another one. But for me, like the primary metric, connecting the policy, technology, and sustainability is identify your goals. And if in Massachusetts and Boston, we've set a goal of carbon neutrality by mid-century, which I think is absolutely fundamentally necessary, and everything else has to tie to that. Then whatever infrastructure decisions we are making in terms of fuel source or transportation has to be, does it keep open the possibilities of hitting that? Or is that something we need to change between now and then? And if we need to change it, then we need to underwrite the full cost of decarbonizing whatever that infrastructure is in the decision we're making today. Because if we don't, we're just adding another externalized cost on somebody else down the line. And so we talk about mid-century like it's a long way away. It's 33 years away.
Right.
The vast majority of folks in this room will be alive when we're hitting that, saying whether or not we're successful or not, right? And so
We shouldn't
it's
call it
really
mid-century anymore, we should just say, you know.
within the next 30 years.
From now,
right?
yeah.
And so-
mid-century model.
So if we're underwriting infrastructure decisions around power plants, around grid, around transportation, that we expect to be around for 40 or 50 years, we have no choice but to make sure they are at least convertible to carbon neutrality today.
And on the statewide level, we have a commitment through the Global Warming Solutions Act to reduce emissions 25% by 2020 and 80% by 2050, which my organization has also been very active in trying to getting passed into law, and then trying to make sure we're on track to meet those requirements for the future. So there's like local reasons and statewide reasons to be moving in that direction and taking these things into account as decisions are made.
And there are threads in needle. To get a success story, I think the Salem Natural Gas Power Plant that CLF negotiated, there's the first power plant built in the ICE New England grid that has a pre-negotiated decommissioning date. And that was the only way CLF would be sued.
Oh, that's
It's by saying this power plant has to decommission before mid-century. And if it doesn't pay for itself based on that economic life cycle, you can't do it. And lo and behold, they figured out a way of making it work.
And I think the challenge to designers is to help us build carbon neutral ready designs.
And you know, that's a perfect segue. What all of you said is we'll say the final question for the day, but please feel free to expand. But during my conversation with Brian, which was just the day before yesterday in the evening, he spoke about this idea of future-proofing. And so, you know, future-proofing, of course, it technically means something, but future-proofing in a larger sense means many things, from the social angle, from the technology angle, and so on. So I would just like to open it up to all the panelists, maybe 2 sentences. It's not going to happen, but just really short. What does future-proofing mean to you within this context in your work? And that's sort of the question. So, Brian, do you want to start with it, since you're the one who's got this part? Yes.
So when we do a lot of smart, so it's a smart cities term that we use, but it has a much broader connotation. But basically, I mean, from the 2 slides that I showed, I mean, we don't know what we don't know. from a technology standpoint. So how do we make, as a prerequisite to all of our smart cities and digital consulting and technology consulting, that embed that concept and make sure that to the degree possible, we have future-proof our place-based designs. So we're consultants in the built environment. And so when people come and say, okay, the big ideas are nice, and we don't sell widgets, we don't sell platforms, they want to know how big a conduit do I put in the street to allow for all future technology? Where do I put my gas? How do I get wireless in the most efficient way? How many folks wired their houses for surround sound system and then realize like 10 years later, that's a whole lot of wire.
No,
that you
exactly.
never need, right? So how do you think about future-proofing these assets for digital technology? The other giant layer is future-proofing for climate change. So whatever we put in has to the precautionary principle to the degree certain, be resilient and adaptable to our expected future climate. Because if not, then we may have put in the right capacity for technology and smart, but it's in the wrong location and will fail us when we need it most. So we spent a lot of time working with companies, working with cities, working with technology developers on sort of future-proofing, because we now still big changes. We don't know what we don't know. We know what we don't know. Rumsfeld. So he actually said something wise.
The access of evil, not you. But
Well, you never know.
Well, I'll just build on what Brian just said, just to point out that, we're trying to use the plan to build out a real district to make real in a way that works for the development of the city that we all live in right now, this notion of smart city ready design. And,
that's certainly future-proofing.
and a lot of our weekly discussions with the team, with the consultant team, and with the, we have the water utility, we have the Department of Public Works, we have the Boston Planning and Development Agency, we have transportation, we have energy. It's just the weekly meetings themselves are just really stimulating stakeholder engagement sessions. And a lot of our discussions are around exactly that kind of example. We don't know what we don't know. Like what won't need to be.
Idea of future-proofing for equity, for social future-proofing.
Yeah, we go back
how
to-
communities do that.
to the concepts that I mentioned earlier of decentralization, localization, that in order for communities to be more resilient and really meet their needs in an affordable and equitable and healthy and sustainable way, that we need to look at bringing the resources to our communities and not looking at getting everything from thousands of miles away or even hundreds of miles away, but how do we create systems so that we are meeting our own needs in a more localized way, which will insulate us from things that happen further away, whether it's impacts of climate change or other things, but we will be more self-sufficient, we'll be more resilient if we can kind of meet our own needs locally.
Josh,
I'll be
any
real
thoughts?
quick, yeah, just from the point of view of transportation.
Sure.
I think future-proofing means understanding that it's very different because the technology is a very different paradigm now. For example, if we're going to electrify the transportation sector, now we have to understand how transportation connects to the grid and how a smart grid is going to be necessary to enable that. So from the point of view of transportation, we really have to just rethink pretty much everything we've previously thought about. It's an entirely new it's a new paradigm now.
It's also interesting. So we could continue the conversation. I think we have a little coffee and some lots of sweet things that will be wonderful. And so I just want to encourage the people in the audience as well as my students. I know they don't have a lot of time and they might be rushing off, but don't feel shy to introduce yourselves so that you can at least tap into their wisdom and feedback at later points in your life. So thank you
for
so
having
much.
us.